Good night, one and all. This is going to be a very quick video, but nonetheless, we're going to go through it. And this has to do with the DCEU and realism. I just wanted to go through this really quickly. Shout out to all you guys. I'm just popping up on social media right for a minute. It's a quick stream, very quick stream. You know, it's 12:49 a.m. Means I've got to take less than maybe 10 minutes with you guys. But I wanted to throw this in as quickly as possible. Shout out to all of the people, Dave, Ethan, Leroy Kong, and the regulars that come through. I know it's very, very late in the night, so some of you guys are going to see this video probably tomorrow. All right, so let's get into what we want to talk about. Remember, you can comment in the chat section. We'll check you guys on the chat section. When you say anything in the chat section, I'm going to be on there with you guys, all right? All right, so here's what's up. We're talking about the DCEU and realism, and I want to just explore that really quickly with you guys, explore realism with you guys. So let's get to it. Let's get to it. All right, so one of the best ways to describe realism is to see how many things in the real world are actually in this movie. In other words, this movie is more of a reflection of our real world and how accurate they are to the real world. And what I did, I was having a discussion with another guy because he didn't quite understand what I was saying about the appeal of the DCU to me. And I was just telling him my opinion of the appeal of the DCU to me, that to me it's much more mature in terms of its themes. And to me, it's much more realistic. And he was like, but you know, it's superhero movie. It's not going to be realistic. There's a guy flying in the sky, blah, 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 blah. And I think a lot of people, when I tell them that it's more realistic, and I find it very realistic, they keep on coming with these things. Well, it's a superhero and he flies in the sky and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, it's a fictional character. It comes from a comic book, but the way how they treat the character is with realism. And let me start off by talking first about, like, for instance, the military. And this is just a few little examples of what we talk about with realism. The military in Man of Steel, the military in Batman v Superman that we saw, was very accurate to how the actual militaries are in real life and in the real world. And that's where we say we bring the degree of realism. For instance, yes, we have superhero characters. Okay, they come from comic books. But our approach of realism or hyper-realism to these characters is to make it believable that these characters actually exist in our world today. And one of the things that Zack Snyder and company were really trying to get across to us and make it real to us was the fact that they made it seem as if it was possible that this was happening in our world. And to do that, they literally had to ensure that not only they were accurate to our world, but they had people from our world seen on that big screen. So for instance, and that takes a lot of research and a lot of detail, right? For instance, the military in Man of Steel. So what we're just basically looking at is the military in Man of Steel actually used actual military people, one, and two, they really down to the last bits of detail, how the military operates, how it interacts, how it interfaces, the mannerisms in the military, the different ranks in the military. It literally pulled these things from there. And that's how they get a realism. The military feels real because it actually is aligned with what the actual military actually does. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. I'll just kind of zoom in so you guys can see what I'm talking about here. Well, that's nice and sharp. Oh, yeah. Ooh, that's nice and good. Okay. So first of all, when we were looking at Man of Steel, we saw that Clark Kent, he ended up in the north, and he went into this bar, and he was working there. And in the bar, there were two soldiers. Now, if you paid attention, you would see that they were actually Canadian soldiers. You'd see the Canadian badge on them. And actually, they came from the Canadian National Guard. And this is what a Canadian National Guard soldier actually looks like when he's dressed up. Guess what? The soldiers were dressed the same way, same fatigues, same clothing, same look. Now, this is very important to understand how accurate Zack Snyder and they were working towards this. Not only that, but actually some of the people actually playing these roles were actual military people. Now, I can't say if this guy wasn't an actor or if he was a military person, but I do know in Man of Steel, I've seen in the behind the scenes footage certain people testifying. They actually are people who actually do the actual military operations that they were doing in the movie. And I'm not just talking about Air Force pilots now and stunt pilots. I'm talking about people who are actually involved in things like, ground movements, helicopter, the helicopter guy that actually, does air traffic control and so on and so on. So I'm not just talking about for the stunt work and stuff like that. So what you got was a very interesting. You saw in Man of Steel, you saw the Canadian National Guard there. Now, why that's important is because they were Superman actually, or Clark Kent, he was actually on Canadian soil when he came up from the sea, from the oil rig thing. And what's interesting is that we later find out that the U.S. is there, but not just any U.S. It was U.S. Northcom. Now, U.S. Northcom involves NORAD, but it involves the U.S. Air Force. And the U.S. Northcom basically is like the air defense for the United States. Now, it's not the first time we've heard about the U.S. Northcom, but what's interesting on DARPA even, but in any movie, but how they get more accurate to that is in the actual processing and the operations that we see. So we know that, for instance, Colonel Hardy, he's part of the U.S. Air Force and he's part of the U.S. Northcom. And the U.S. Northcom worked in conjunction with the Canadian Air Force and the Canadian National Guard, and they had a U.S.-Canada agreement. This is an actual event that's happening here, where they actually had the U.S.-Canada agreement. This was under George Bush, and we had NORAD as well, North American, observe as a North American observing defense system. Okay, NORAD. And the U.S.-Canadian agreement helped to facilitate NORAD. Now, what's interesting about NORAD is this is the actual agreement here that is signed between U.S. and Canada. And again, notice the address of the Canadian official and the U.S. official. What's interesting about this is if you look at even this guy is a colonel, the colonels for the U.S. Northcom, and they're dressed in this fatigue below. He's wearing this because of the cold weather above. Okay, and you can see he's from the Air Force. And here, this is a research professor for DARPA. That's the the research agency for the defense, America's defense. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this whole thing is that NORAD, which we see here, this is one of the actual NORAD operations where they're actually doing operations. And again, you see the Canadian official here and the U.S. official here. Let me just zoom in a little bit more so you can see it better. See, so you can see the Canadian maple leaf there. So this is a Canadian official working in conjunction with the U.S. official. And a NORAD, basically, as it says here, we have the watch. This is the actual NORAD, okay? And if you look here, you will see this is the United States Northern Command. You'll see the symbol, as well as this is a symbol for NORAD, okay? And they're monitoring the news. They monitor different things in the American, of the North, in North America, and all in Alaska and everywhere else. Okay, NORAD tracks everything. Now, why that's important is because NORAD was a base of operations in Man of Steel as well. Again, we have the watch, and it's basically sculpted and designed after an actual NORAD outpost. So the accuracy behind NORAD is exceptional. Again, you see the signs up there. You see NORAD right there, and you see, again, the North American Command. Okay, so you see the symbols all up on the wall, and then they're monitoring things where they monitor different things, news and planes and all of that stuff. And this center with all the computers and everything is very much like this NORAD command post here. Okay, and that's important for you to understand, because they did a lot of things very, very accurate to the actual things happening. And that's because Zack Snyder worked closely with the U.S. military in forming all of his movies, from Justice League to Man of Steel to Batman v Superman, and in fact, it's a military guy that actually trained Gal Gadot and Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck. It's a military guy that actually trained them in their what they had to do to get up to speed to make it appear real. Okay, so you have to understand how accurate and how much research these guys actually put into these things, and that's why we said there's realism there. Because unlike Hollywood, which, if you've ever watched The Winter Soldier, it's a romanticized Hollywood kind of story. All right. The actual military way how things are conducted is not like that. All right. James Bond is not. That's not how it's actually done. It's very romanticized. Okay. It's Hollywood. But when you talk about movies such as Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, to some degree Justice League, it's not Hollywood. It's literally pulling from what you actually have seen every day. I'll show you some more stuff. Don't worry. We'll get into it in more detail. The other thing, the U.S. base that was set in Canada with NORAD and Northcom and DARPA, that's up in the Canadian mountains here, which you see here, is very similar in its construction and design to one of the U.S. bases we saw up in Antarctica. Okay, this is a U.S. base in Antarctica, and again, the design is very similar. It's also very similar to the Haiti U.S. relief that happened in 2010. If you look at just the way how it's spread out and everything, it's very, very similar to these things, showing that it's a military base that's there. Okay. So again, very accurate to it, and you can see they have their Humvee looking things with the tractor footings and stuff like that. Okay, and the point behind it is there, and remember, they actually went to the actual venues. Yes, there's some CG involved here. But at the end of the day, very accurate to the actual what an actual military base setup will look like, not Hollywood. And this is very important for you to understand. Hollywood doesn't care about that too much. They don't go that deeply into things. And this is the thing I appreciate about Zack Snyder. He treated this superhero movie as if it's an actual thing happening in history. It's an actual event happening. So that's why I said Zack Snyder takes his characters very seriously. And then when you look at, again, here is the NORAD symbol, which is partly blocked by General Swanwick. Okay. And you have the U.S. and you have the Canadian flag. Here you see the maple leaf again, the U.S. and Canadian flags here, showing there's a joint effort. And if you look here, this is the United States Northern Command, which is NORAD, U.S. NORAD. So here you go. There it is over here, and you see it here. So this is behind this officer. This is an actual general, an actual Northcom general. And notice how very accurate General Swanwick is to that general. Literally. They literally used a basically Northcom general's outfit on this guy. Okay. And this is very important to understand how accurate they're doing these things. Okay. This general is General Hoover. Okay. And he deals with NORAD. You can see again, there's the same sign behind him here. You have the American flag there. Okay. Canadian flag. And then you have NORAD's symbol behind General Swanwick. So that's how accurate it is. And you got to understand that in my opinion, how they treated these sets of DCEU movies, Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, how it was treated sort of reminds me of what Christopher Nolan's approach to things as well in realism. And again, in my opinion, Zack Snyder hadn't done that degree of realism in his movies before. So I feel like there was some influence between David Goyer and also Christopher Nolan. And, as people said, Zack Snyder generally did stylized movies. But in this case, these were heavily grounded movies. Okay. The only other movie I think that was sort of realistic like that was Owls of Ga'Hoole, how the owls moved and how they behaved and everything, and just that they talked. So in this case, the world is very much grounded like our world. It's literally, you could say it's our world. It's our world you're watching at. And so barring certain things with the actors and how they acted out the roles, the accuracy to the real world and the current world, was just alarmingly similar. In fact, even down to the Green Berets, the Air Force Green Berets that actually General Swanwick enters the door to NORAD US, and even this sign here, all of this detail is actually accurate to an actual Green Beret for the Air Force. Okay, that might be found in NORAD or US Northcom. And so all of that detail shows us, and you can see this is the US Air Force sign. You can see it right there on this Green Beret. The outfit is very similar, and so on. So you can see that this is down to the last. And actually, this may be a military person, and this may be a military person that's actually participating in the movie. So down to the actual details, I mean, you know, that's how real they brought this stuff to us. And I've just touched the tip of the details that was actually given in these DCU movies that brings that reality. And that's why we talk about realism in these movies. My friend, he tried to cite in Iron Man that CNN was found there as a media outlet, and that's the other thing I'm going to talk about is media outlets in these movies. And again, once again, they don't understand the degree of realism. Like, for instance, the military that we talked about in the DCEU, they literally they're like a character in the DCU. They literally are presence in the DCU. It's not like they just appear and disappear. If you look at all of the Avengers movies, all right, or all of the MCU movies, the military has not been a central part. Okay, the Incredible Hulk, the military was a central part in that movie. But for the most part, when you look at the MCU and the series of movies they've had, the military has had very little to do with those movies. It's just been used as a device or a tool, and then we focus on the heroes, right? For the most part. When you look at Wonder Woman, when you've looked at Man of Steel, when you've looked at Batman v Superman, when you've even looked at Justice League, okay, when you look at Suicide Squad, the military is a central position in all of these movies because with a threat, the military must be called to action to defend against a threat. So the military has been a central part of all of these DCU movies, okay? Whereas that's not the case with the MCU. That's not the case with the X-Men series, even though with X-Men First Class, we saw the military involved in that, right? And we know that the military is sort of involved in the X-Men movies like X2 and so on. The military has been kind of there, but it's not so much the military as it has been a central person of the military. But here in the DCEU, the military, yes, we have General Swanwick. Yes, we have Major Ferris. Yes, we have Major, what was his name? Major what's his name? Just hold on, I'll tell you. Major Hardy, okay. But those were some central figures, but still, it's the military. We see how the military functions. We see dialogue between the military. We see conversation between the military language, that kind of stuff. And so it's very important to understand there's a huge military presence in the DCEU. And yes, some people will say Hulk, there was a military, but that was a covert military operation. It still was not to the extent that we had with Man of Steel or Batman v Superman or any of those other movies where the military is literally focused on as if they're a character in the whole story. So that's why I said that. And then the other point is the military was never, in all of those movies we talk about, the military has never been a reflection of the actual military and how actual military perform and behave. If you look at movies like Scully, for instance, where you see how actual pilots behave and how actual pilots conduct themselves. Or you look at the movies such as, I'm trying to remember what his name is, the guy who was an intelligence agent who defected to Russia, right? I forgot what his name is. It begins with S. You see the inner workings of the CIA and how these special agencies actually work. You don't get that in comic book movies. You always get some kind of Hollywood spin-off kind of thing that's washed down and dialed back. Not in Man of Steel. You actually get actual military language, actual military people functioning as military people, and the actors have to get up to speed with what the actual military actually does. And I find that degree of realism something that, again, you have to understand that the DCU is pushing at. And that's the thing that I think gives much more depth to the DCEU. Not to mention, when we're talking about a Man of Steel, Man of Steel pretty much deals with the topic of xenophobia and very much deals with the difficulties someone growing up as a foreigner in a country, take for instance the United States of America. You know, they don't look too well on foreigners right now, and how difficult it is to have to get past stereotypes being a foreigner. And you can see how the world stereotyped Superman and alienated, even in this little town of Smallville, him being so different, it alienated him and the difficulties and the challenges he had to overcome. And then thinking of BVS in light of the fact that we had these terrorists who came to Earth, and Kryptonians terrorized the Earth, and now Superman, he's a Kryptonian too. And so as a result, people by default think he will terrorize the world too. It kind of reminds us and mirrors the Islamophobia out there, that, you know, terrorists come from Islam, you know, they've been Islam, or they claim to be Islamic, and so therefore other people of Islam, they're potential terrorists too. And that's the same phobia that you see in Batman v Superman. So to me, the stories are deeper, they're much more layered, they emphasize a certain point. And so I say they are much more mature themes dealing with issues we're grappling with today. Current issues we're grappling with today. I think the only MCU movies I think that are truly tried to get a grip on that have been Black Panther, which really dealt with the real substantial issues. Winter Soldier sort of just toyed with it on a superficial level. I think it was more of action and, you know, more espionage than it was dealing with real issues and real topics. When we look at, so Black Panther definitely directly deals with real issues, and that's why I value that movie very highly. Captain America, the First Avenger, was not so much about real issues because it was a historical story. And it wasn't really trying to deal with real issues. It was more about character development. It was about Captain America's character development. And since that time, I've not really seen Captain America develop his character much more other than that. But it's still interesting that that's a movie that dealing with character development you can identify with. On this topic of Wonder Woman, however, Wonder Woman dealt with relevant current issues and showed how since 1917, these issues have been around. So I found that very interesting, and the outlook and critique on our military and how we proceed to do things and engage in war. I thought it was very, very enlightening. The DCU has more oomph, I think, in their movies. And again, realism, dealing with things that are relatable, that are real. I listen to people, again, over and over again, miss the mark when they say, well, it's about superheroes and superheroes bashing each other to the core and stuff. And I think that's a very naive and very infantile or childish way to look at superhero movies. I think a lot of people go to watch superhero movies for kick up, right? And to me, the DCU is not really focused on that. It's focused on different aspects of our humanity. And so that's why the DCU doesn't spend a whole lot of time talking about Superman. You don't hear anybody calling Superman Superman in the DCU. Yes, he's called Superman much more than the other superheroes, but for the most part, he's called Clark or he's called Kal. If you notice in the DCU, they have a very subtle way of staying away from the stereotypical names of these heroes. Another thing I find very interesting is that the heroes don't call themselves what they are. It's the world that starts to call them certain names. So you don't hear the name Batman, like my friend was saying so correctly. You must only heard it about twice, and it was in Justice League. But the Bat, or Bats, or the Bat Thing, or the Bat Person, or the Bat Vigilante. This is the kind of language you hear. Now, in the papers, sometimes they write him as the Batman, But for the most part, you don't hear people calling him Batman. And I find that very interesting. You don't find anybody, you can look through the entire DCU, you'll never hear anyone call Wonder Woman Wonder Woman. Through the entire DCU. No one's called her that. And that's very interesting. Her name is Diana. And I find these things very interesting, how they're very, they've gotten past all of the sort of superficial nature of superheroes and have delved deeper into them. And people say, well, you shouldn't have a deep dive in superheroes. You shouldn't take them so seriously and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, that's the point behind a realistic world in which you're trying to mirror this world, pretty much like any other genre movie would do. Just because it's a comic book movie, do you have to treat it like a comic book movie? It's interesting how Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, where they did call him Batman a couple times, it's very interesting how people were open to that, but all of a sudden they're closed-minded to the DCEU, and I find that so funny. Because these people have super abilities and gifts doesn't mean they're not individuals and people. And that's the beauty of what the DCU offers us. It tells us, in spite of these people's incredible gifts and abilities that they have, pretty much like you and me and other people who have incredible abilities and gifts, they are people, and they have needs, and they need to, live their individual lives. Now, the CW tends to that in a much more teenage kind of way. Their love life and romance and that kind of somewhat fickle way of doing things. The DCEU goes in a deeper way to show why these people are related, why they have relationships. For instance, Lewis and Clark, they have a relationship because Clark has realized that in Lewis, we can see that humanity can trust an individual. And Lewis admires the ideals that Clark presses towards. So you can see why these two people have a relationship, why they love each other. It's not just an attraction. It's not just fickle little teenage romance, or I got a thing for him or whatever. And so it's that kind of maturity that I'm talking about in the DCEU. Whereas in the MCU, Iron Man likes Pepper Potts, right? She's like a good, loyal person to him. But it's more he has a thing with her because he trusts her or whatever. It's fickle. It's Hollywood. And that's the problem with some of these movies. You look at Vision. He's trying to be human. And this Scarlet Witch. But it's more of an attraction. It's more of a sexual tension, sexual attraction. And he's trying to be more human. So he sees her that way. And she sees him as, she likes him because he has powers. And it's just fickle. I don't like those kinds of relationships. They're typical Hollywood stuff. It's not real. It's not, if I were in the real world, that relationship wouldn't last. It's got to be something much more, a higher something that causes people to come together. And, for people to stay together for 20, 30 years, it's not just going to be because you have abilities or you have special gifts or you could do this and I could do the same thing. So that's why we joined together. It's kind of fickle. And that's one of the things that with the Flash, with the accidents, you could tell Whedon had something to do with that. It's kind of fickle how that meshed together was. But as I said before, I find that it's not about superheroes. It's about people. And this is what the DCU does in a real sort of concrete way, I find. And you tell there's a lot of research people did into the psychology of people and so on, and how they would come together that I think is a lot more thought out than, say, other universes or other franchises out there, quite frankly. And I always say the franchises out there, they have to use humor to laugh at the Hollywood way in which they're putting together something. It doesn't feel real. And I can tell you Zack Snyder's not Hollywood. That's one thing I can tell you about him. He's not Hollywood, which is why his movies, to me, I have a great appeal to me because it's not a Hollywood approach to how you go about doing things. And it's very reflective. It's thought-provoking. And I like that. He goes against the grain a lot. So this is a military presence. Now, let me talk about the media. Again, the media is discussing, deeper issues. When CNN had actually published the thing on Iron Man, it was Tony Stark came out, and he's this popular figure out there. So CNN decided to cover him. And he goes on to declare he's Iron Man. That's newsworthy, yes, but it's not substantive. A news outlet like CNN doesn't deal with personalities per se, even though they've been dealing with Donald Trump. They deal with issues. And so I could see CNN, for instance, covering a press conference where Senator Finch is talking about Superman and his impact on the world and how he's unilaterally harming the world, and we need to clear the air on it. And they have this committee investigating him. It makes perfect sense that that will be covered on CNN, because CNN has covered things with Hillary Clinton emails, the Donald Trump investigation, blah, 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 blah. So this follows what happens in the real world. So you would say, of course, this makes sense. And he's a sort of geopolitical entity or figure, and he's not from Earth. Of course, you're going to have this in the media investigating him. So that made sense. When the U.S. Capitol, the Senate, blew up, that made news. That made sense, you know, and you can see all of the different people of the world responding to it and how their different views on it are. And to me, that makes sense as well. Again, we see people who work and are inspired by Superman. We see little kids and how they respond to that. We see people on different types of social media. We have people, you know, with their laptops, people with their cell phones, you know, people on the plane, how they react to different events that are happening and unfolding. And then we have people from the real world, like Anderson Cooper and several other media people and media houses. We see that. We even see the BBC covering certain things, and other NBC's there, you know, we have CBS there. So it makes for real world sort of feeling. It's a real world atmosphere. And that's why I said there's this realism in the DCEU. You don't see that in the MCU. And then again, the news is a part of our lives. Every day we wake up, we hear about things in the news. And it should be that way in the real world. And that's not the way how it is in these universal comic book movies. They generally go with the protagonist, and they don't even care what the world feels about them. They just kind of isolate down to the protagonist and the challenge at hand and take down the big baddie. And BVS said, spat in the face of that. Wonder Woman spat in the face of that. Right. And BVS had the media covering everything, and you're seeing how the people in the world respond to it, like how it would happen in the real world with social media and with the media out there. That's how it would actually happen. And so that's the degree of realism I find in that world. And I actually left an annotation here about that. And let me see if I can just get to it, because I'm not getting to it right now. I don't know why. It's just not happening. I don't know why. Should be able to zoom in, and that's not happening. I don't know why. So let me try going over here. There you go. There's the arrow. There you go. There, finally. Oh, okay. This is not what I want. Let me go back here. Oh, so these are just media personalities that you know from the real world. You have Anderson Cooper, Dana Bash. You have Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's been in the media. Soldata O'Brien, she's with CNN, and she was with this is an imaginary media outlet, PBS. Charlie Rose, just been fired from there. And I'm not quite sure if his situation really was as bad as we thought it was, but anyway. Andrew Sullivan, another media person. Jon Stewart, who's a comedian, he was with The Daily Show at the time before he left. You know, I want to show you some real stuff here. Let's see, there you go, beautiful. I wanted to show you, so there's the BBC back here, CNN, these are actual outlets, actual information, and this is actually how people in the military actually react to these things, as you can see here. There's the young child watching this reaction. Again, the world's reaction to Superman. People say, oh, so negative and blah, 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 but really, the world's reaction to Superman is probably how we would react to an alien who we don't fully trust. Because we've seen them actually do that to Black people, to immigrants right now, the sort of xenophobic sentiment. So this is actually real. This is as real as it gets, right? Here they were talking about, this is the aftermath of the bombing, and investigating Wallace Keep's role in it and Superman's role in it, you know. And it's very interesting how, again, that is as real as it gets. So if you were to take a superhero or one of these fictional characters and place them in our world today, this is what it would look like. And I believe this is the premise under which these movies are being made. So you're seeing our world, and it reflects on our world and how we would treat people. And we literally see this today. We have the issues with immigration, people separating children from their families, and nobody cares about it. The sentiment that immigrants should leave the country, and they're taking our jobs and and they're a threat. And this is the same thing that is happening in BVS. So that's why I talk about realism. It's not that Superman can fly, even though they do explain it with science fiction anyway, but it's the point that it's real. These are real issues, real problems. They are hot issues, and you don't see that in the MCU. You don't. I mean, okay, Black Panther dealt with real issues, but even then, the world in Black Panther is still somewhat imaginary. Like, you don't think of Wakanda as an actual place. Some people were saying, well, I feel I should go to Wakanda. You're just trolling Wonder Woman, man. You've seen Themyscira. That looks like an actual place. And the reason it looks like an actual place is because it's actually taken from an actual place in Italy. And then they do some CG embellishments of that. With Wakanda, it's actually a set. It's not an actual venue in Africa. Okay. And that's the difference. So that's why Patty Jenkins was able to pull it off, because it was an actual place in the world that they fused with some CG. Okay. And that's the difference. With the military always looks real in BVS and Man of Steel, less so in Justice League, and that's there's a reason for that. But it looks real because the Smallville fight scenes and so on, because they actually fuse actual real military actions with CGI. It's a mixture of the two. Okay, and that's why it feels so real. And some of the final fight scenes in BVS, they say they feel it's CGI because sometimes it seems like the explosions are over the top. Not Michael Bay explosions at all, but it shows how powerful Doomsday is. But at the end of the day, that might be so. But you look at it, it's grounded off of real buildings. Like they literally mapped out real buildings, real cities and stuff, and then they built the world that they were going to interact with. And again, real actors. It was really Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman. There was sometimes CG double gagglers, but for the most part, it was real people. Doomsday was obviously a CG double gagger, but he felt solid, and he felt like he was sort of morphing into what we know as Doomsday. And given enough time, he would have probably looked like what Doomsday looks like. But at the end of the day, while he did look real, some people say, well, that didn't look real enough. But you look at the MCU, it's a joke compared to that. You look at even X-Men, the X-Men universe, and it's nothing compared to the kind of detail and the kind of work that has been done in the DCEU. And that's because we're dealing with a realistically grounded world, universe. They're keeping it realistically grounded. There's a certain degree of grounding into it, and that's what hyper-realism is. It's supposed to kind of deceive you into thinking this is a real world, this can actually happen. That's the whole idea behind it. So I just wanted to share that stuff with you guys. I think that's about it that I have to say. And I wanted to cover this topic because I'm tired of seeing people say over and over again that it's just a superhero movie, and Superman can fly, and these guys have super strength. So I don't know what you're talking about. There's no realism in there. It's like, no, there is realism in it. That's why we talk about realism all the time. It's real. The world is real. The world functions real. And then they go on to try and quote Kevin Feige that, their world, Marvel, they're not as powered. And no, that's not the point. It's not about powers. It's about how the characters interact in the world and how the world is and interacts with them. All right. Just because you're a gifted individual and you have special abilities doesn't mean that the world is not realistic. And not because somebody has less powers or powered down that makes the world realistic. You see what I'm saying? It's how the characters interface, how the world treats these characters. And you don't see that in the MCU. You still don't know what does the world think about these characters, these Avengers? They don't know, because we never really get the world as a character in those movies. What does the military do in those worlds, and what's carrying on from day to day? We don't know in the MCU, because we are focused on these specific characters who save the day. No, at no point in time does the world ever save them. You know, that's unrealistic. And it's all of these unrealistic things that I try to explain to people. The DCEU is not necessarily built on fantasy, it's sci-fi. Now, maybe, you know, the introduction of magic, we saw some fantasy in uh, Suicide Squad. We saw some fantasy in Wonder Woman. Uh, we will see some fantasy in Shazam. You know, Aquaman's more of, again, more sci-fi-ish. There will be, of course, there are certain fantastical elements, but sci-fi explains fantastical elements so that you can think they are possible. That's the whole point behind hyperrealism. So at least how the DCU started is in a hyper-realistic kind of way. And it's amazing when people talk about BVS and how much of a terrible comic book movie is. And I'm like, either you have a huge misunderstanding or you just can't think that advanced because you've been dumbed down by what comic book movies are. But BVS is an incredible movie. It is my best comic book movie. Is it of all time? I still haven't evaluated that. I haven't thought if it's the best comic book movie of all time. I know it's better than Watchmen. I know it's better than Unbreakable. I have to think about all the comic book movies I've seen. But anyway, at the end of the day, the DCU is, you know, the Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice is probably my favorite DCEU movie. And it is my favorite comic book movie out of them. I think it's head and shoulders above everything else that has been put out in comic book movie land. And the reason that is because, again, these characters have been treated like real characters, and it literally timestamps a certain point in our history. Sort of like what Wonder Woman does, but Wonder Woman, for some reason, got favorable reviews. And I also put out I was able to identify a video on YouTube which was talking about the bias of the critics and how they pretty much been bought out by Disney. You know, they've been treated well and pampered and so on. And so they put favorable reviews for every single DC movie, for every Disney movie. But DC movies, because Warner Bros. Didn't pander to them and couch them, they have been always with vitriol and trying to attack. And so they've used their pen in negative ways. But I believe that the DCEU fan base, for the most part, not fan base, sorry, people have started to gravitate towards the DCU more and more until Justice League. And the reason Justice League was supposed to sink the DCEU. They were supposed to sink the DCU with Justice League. That's what the media, everybody tried really hard to sink the DCU through Justice League. And the reason they were trying to do that is because since Zack was replaced by another director, they went in for the kill. They really tried to sink the DCU. And they're going to try again with Aquaman. We know this already. And they're going to try again with Shazam. And they have attacked David Sandberg concerning Shazam. And the reason they're doing this, the viciousness, is because they know how superior these products are. So they have to viciously attack the products to deter consumers from actually going to see the products. And believe you me, they're going to try again with Aquaman. They're going to try. They're going to try. And it's sad because these are much higher caliber movies. This is the kind of movie, even Justice League last year is a much higher caliber movie than anything I've seen the MCU put out, period. Anything. None of their content can touch Justice League because of the message of Justice League. And Justice League is still that movie. Thor Ragnarok is shit. Justice League is still that movie that moves things forward. This is what I ride off of, Justice League, because Justice League helps me with just thinking about community and how we can move forward and problem solve things, even in this face of threats and, you know, autocratic rulership. And so, you know, I really truly appreciate Justice League. I think the bar is pretty high with Justice League. Yes, okay, so there are some shortcomings with it, but I always feel the reaction to Justice League was unmerited. First of all, the overreaction to the fact that, you know, Zack Snyder didn't get to direct the movie all the way to the end. And even all now, there's all of this negative press that they still are trying to push on Justice League. And it's funny to me because, in my opinion, it's a hell of a lot better movie than anything the MCU has put out to date. Infinity War is a bunch of crap as far as I'm concerned. And I still think it's a waste of time. People are not going to gain anything from that. That's a movie that is what we call nihilistic shit. You know, that's a nihilistic movie. And it has no point to it. What's the point of it? Oh, this guy, he knows how to take over and he's been successful at taking over things. But what do we learn for communities and for building communities? What do we gather from it? What's the realism? What is the thing that mirrors our world? Zip. It's an empty movie. And so I don't waste my time on those kinds of movies. And so at the end of the day, Thor Ragnarok, it had one or two take-home messages, and that was good. But it's empty. These are empty, stupid, empty movies. Stupid, empty movies that appeal to the masses because it appeals to their fantasies. But at the end of the day, nothing. There's nothing in those movies. They're a waste of time. And for those people who want to praise whoever for those movies, you guys you're a shame, in my opinion. You're a shame, in my opinion. I remember the guy trying to bring up Infinity War in front of me. We were having a discussion, and he's talking about Deadpool, which again is a waste of time for me. Deadpool's a waste of time. I don't watch Deadpool. That's a waste of time. That's a waste of entertainment. And so he wants to bring up Deadpool, which I told him, first of all, the discussion kind of pretty much shut down with that. I told him that I'm not into Deadpool. And he was like, the meta humor. So I was like, I'm not into that. I'm not. It's like Naked Gun 2.5 and stuff, and I'm not into that. That was for my childish days. I'm not a child anymore. And I think there are consequences to everything, And then he goes on to say, how it spoofed the DCEU, and I was like, cool. And then he said how, it reminds him so much of Thanos, and I was like, stop right there. But I'm the reverse of Flash. I'm like, I don't want to hear about the Infinity War. I just don't want to hear about it. It's like a bad experience for me. Like, me and Infinity War just don't mix. And he was like, because a lot of people, they like Infinity War. And I'm happy for people who like Infinity War. But it's just not a movie for me. Like, that and Thor Ragnarok are not movies for me. Like, don't ever tell me about those movies. So, because you get me started on those movies, that's where you're going to see the mean streak in me, because I'll tear those movies down like if they're nothing. Okay. They don't even exist, right? Because the philosophy behind those movies is flawed and stupid. And then they use comedy to try and, because they know they're doing stupidness and they know they can't really explain everything. So they use comedy to try and say, well, we're aware that we're talking a bunch of shit right now. So there's a joke, and I really don't bring those movies. Don't tell me about those movies, because it's a disrespect, first of all, I think, to comic books, in my opinion, for people who actually read comic books. And then the other thing to me is that these movies are disrespect to comic book cinema. They're dumbing down comic book cinema. They're dumbing down comic book movies. They're not an asset to them. They're a plague to comic book movies. But that's my personal opinion. I come from a different perspective where I don't laugh at everything that I see, because I understand the consequences to laughing at certain things. I do believe that if there's something truthful or real and honest that needs to be said, then I may find humor in it, and I will understand why I'm laughing at it. I think that some of the comedians out there today have some very valid points that they make in their comedy, and they use comedy to say some very, very serious things, make people reflect on them, but they do it in a manner so that people can actually digest it through humor. I understand that. I don't understand pointless humor where people are fans of that because it's a way for them to sort of relax and not have to worry about things. It's a kind of escapism. I'm not into that shit. Okay, not into that shit. And so you'll find that for me, I have absolute disdain for that kind of shit. It annoys me to no end that people will go into the cinema to see a whole bunch of nothing. It's almost as if they took a drug. It's almost as they took, it's as if, in my opinion, they took cocaine or they took marijuana or heroin. It's the same thing, in my opinion, or they drank alcohol, because to me, it's a level of drunkenness where you're poking fun at things, but you're actually destroying. It's a destructive humor. It's a mockery. It's not really, there's you can mock things where you have a point behind it. You actually have a point to what you're saying. But when you're just doing it for the sense of humor and you sacrificing characters, you're destroying the integrity of the character for humor. Oh hell no! Oh hell no! You know, it's like if I were to equate this, somebody coming and making a racist statement and then coming back and saying, "Oh, it was just a joke. I was just joking." To me, it's like that, and that's why Infinity War to me is a travesty. But even in that, in the sense of the travesty, we can have discussions out of Infinity War that can help the younger people because I try to turn a negative into positive. So you know, the issue of was there really sacrifice in Infinity War? Um, did Thanos actually sacrifice Gamora? Did he love Gamora? I think these are very important issues that need to be discussed and addressed now. Otherwise, it will have damaging impacts for our future. This future generations will believe that is love, and that is not love. That is not love, and there's no two ways around it. And I feel like this movie is very destructive in what it did, along with many different lines. So that's what I had to say about that. And again, I'm speaking purely from a perspective of someone using logic, someone using things to better communities. But I like having discussions with people about different things. So I like the dialogue, the to and fro. Let me see what you guys are saying in the chat section because I have not been paying attention to the chat section at all. And we have a bunch of you guys here. Wow, that's incredible. Dave Ethan says, "Hey there." Leroy Kong says, "Hello. Sorry I'm late. Great live video. Well, very well said. Man of Steel was great, great." Leroy Kong says, "The DCU movie storylines are way more realistic than the MCU movies." I also truly believe that too, Leroy. Dave Ethan says, "Heading to bed right now. Great live video, by the way. Keep it up." Yes, man. Thanks a lot. Leroy Kong says, "Again, Zack Snyder is the greatest ever." Okay, superlatives. Random Citizen 19, he puts accent on there. And then Leroy Kong says, "I'm hearing these ungrateful people complain about how DCU being too dark. They are 500% wrong." I like how you are very, you you use a lot of hyperbole, Leroy Kong. That's cool. I mean, I didn't even believe you were still up, man. You got work tomorrow. Anyway, what I would say about that is I don't think that the DCU is too dark. I never really agreed with that. And you know, the most of the time when people say it's too dark, they literally mean it's too dark, like it's too dark to see, which is pretty funny. And when they talk about the CGI being poor, they're really talking about the film that is grainy film. They're not talking really about the resolution of the images or the quality of CGI work that's done. And it's funny to me how very naive people can be. It really is a Trumpian era where people are just becoming so simplistic. And you know what's amazing is a lot of Americans don't even know American history. A lot of Americans don't even pick up books and read unless they have to do it for classes or study. And so we're getting more and more stupid as time goes along. And so, and then we have people who are racist or whatever, they have their different agendas. And so what you end up with is, on social media, is you have these unedited, unfiltered bullying that's going on, or very, very horrible vitriol coming out of people, racist statements and hate crimes and all kinds of things. People even going to the extent of being literally violent and threatening other people online. And as a result of that, sometimes some people come offline and actually kill other people offline. So it's this kind of barbaric, very uncivilized behavior that we're seeing across the social media. That's why I don't want to entertain that. And even in politics, I hope people who are in the social arena with social platforms, I don't think they should engage that. Guys like Trump, they will bring out the worst in people and sort of lower your bar and lower your standards. So I would suggest to people that you don't go down that road that guy's going. He will pay for his ways. That's no if or buts about that. And where he actually does things that are positive, we must also be able to divorce the kind of person that he is and the character that he is from his achievements, whether they're haphazard or not. And so I'm just saying that we have to keep a level of objectivity to everything. You know, I talk about the DCU, I talk about the MCU, I talk about Fox, Marvel, I talk about the IDM franchises like Transformers. I talk about the Dark Universe, which Sony, I think, is trying to do, Columbia. And we have all of these other properties like Mission Impossible, and we have the Monster Universe, the Monsterverse that's out there. We have the um, James Bond universe, and so on. So you have all of these franchises out there. We have to be objective with all of them, and point out what it is. The MCU is very successful at this point in time. I'm not mad at them. I'm just saying, in terms of my preference and how people bash the DCU concerning the MCU, I say to them, you got to really just don't say anything about the DCEU. Okay, I've seen the detractors of the DCEU succeed at getting people in the DCEU because people are so sheep-like and they believe anything they hear, to turn against the DCEU, which was stupid. Okay. And so now I have my guard up for that. And even when I speak on this platform, I'm watching at the fake posers and the people who claim they're DCEU fans, who really don't appreciate the DCU for what it's offering. They worship certain directors, or they believe because there's certain kudos behind certain directors and that they're getting positive reviews by critics, that these are the directors to carry the DCU. There's all of this naivety and stupidity that goes on. And you have to just kind of just say to yourself, listen, I'm going to be the voice that speaks as true as possible, but yet doesn't go over the scale and doesn't become someone who's abusive and Trumpian, shall I say. Also, at the same time, you have to keep the balance where you're saying, I'm going to speak the truth. And at the same time, you also have to think about it as saying, you know what, not only just speak the truth, but I also have to make sure people understand, who say that they're committed to whatever movie, the merits of it. And so the thing that I do in all of my videos, if you notice, is I talk points. I talk the merits of things. I talk why I like certain things, why I think certain things are realistic, and why I say this is realism here. I think a lot of times people try to oversimplify movies, or oversimplify things. Oh, it's just a superhero movie. They have superpowers. It can't be realistic. And that's oversimplifying something. That's something I would expect a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old to say, not someone who's 40 years old, 30 years old, 20 years old. I expect you to think and process things in a much more mature and compartmentalized way. I expect people to be able to make proper arguments, not say, oh, you're a hater of the MCU, because I make points that show that that's not so. And even if I am a hater of the MCU, let's say I'm a hater of the MCU. I'm not, but let's just say I am. Okay. If I'm making valid points, then it means I have a valid reason for hating it. But if I'm not making valid points, then it's another story. Then it means I'm just recklessly hating on the MCU. So the point behind it is, I have a certain taste in movies. Everybody has a certain taste in movies. Okay. So we have to look at that. And then on top of that, however, we have to look at the values in these movies, the stories being told. Are these stories really worthwhile stories or not? And that's the question you have to ask yourself. I've always talked about critiquing movies and critiquing film, and the aspects of film, yes, but critiquing movies. And we've realized now that the people who critique movies these days, they're playing political games. It's obvious. Now, I've listened to some people talk about how Wonder Woman and Black Panther have been favored by the critics because of politics. I want to say you're partly correct, but for the most part, I can tell you for a fact, Wonder Woman and Black Panther are very good movies. And I'll tell you why. Because I always give you a reason. They dealt with relevant issues that are happening in the world today, right now. That's what makes Black Panther and Wonder Woman not only good movies and great movies, but also movies which are relevant and are sparking revolutions and aiding revolutions forward. That can never be a bad movie. And it's nothing to do, yes, there is politics involved in these movies, but you go back and watch these movies. You can watch these movies a couple times and see things you miss. And I'm not talking about Easter eggs. I'm talking about thematic points and building on thematic points. That's what makes Black Panther good. It's CGI, there's still much to be desired with its CGI, just like with Krypton. I think Black Panther and Krypton have, sort of, Krypton's a little bit worse. They have okay CGI, but it's not something to rave about. The final fight scene with Black Panther and Killmonger it was nothing great. It's not great CGI, but the point is, it's the story and the content of the story. These movies have multiple layers to them, and that's what I liked about Black Panther. What I liked about Wonder Woman, that as simple and linear as it seemed, it is much more potent than you thought, and it dealt with certain issues in it that we have never seen in movies, dealing with how we deal with war even today, and how 100 years ago we still doing the same thing. And I find this she forces you to ask certain questions about how we deal with war, how we interact, how we interface, the consequences, the feedback on war. It's an anti-war movie, by the way. Wonder Woman is. And to me, that's the thing. It's not just a superhero movie. It's a movie. Like, it's a movie telling you something. And that's the thing about the DCEU that I love and I appreciate. Whereas the MCU, for those people who fantasize about superheroes and their powers and what they can do and how they kick up and kick up and kick up and kick up, for you who like that kind of thing and you've watched cartoons on it, that's your thing. See, with a little bit of story in it, but it's mostly action that you really came to them to see. Okay, but that's not always how superhero movies were. Blade was a superhero movie about a guy struggling because he doesn't want to be a vampire. He doesn't want to feed off of human blood, and he's hunting them down. Blade was fun. You had this movie with what's his name, Val Helsing. For those of you who don't know, Val Helsing, go check that out. That was interesting as well. And at least those movies had a little something, a little twist in them, a little something. It wasn't just straight kick up and a paper thin storyline with a little bit of intrigue, but it's crap, really, when you think about it. You got, I will not even mention The Matrix. I will not mention Unbreakable. What I mean by that is I'm not going to delve into those. Both those movies have, well, The Matrix has a lot of levels to it. On philosophy. Unbreakable is more about characters and layered characters. And it's nice to see them evolve as the movie's moving along. So that's interesting. Unbreakable is about the formation of a villain, the formation of a hero. So that's a very interesting movie in that respect. But when we talk about, movies with concepts and stuff, you talk about Blade Runner 2049, sci-fi. You talk about, Planet of the Apes, that series, beautiful stuff. You talk about Kong Skull Island. It's not just talking about the ecology and maintaining ecology, but it's also talking about internal strife and how we come at peace with ourselves. It's a very interesting story. When we look at, and of course, assumptions, when we look at, the DCEU, it's coming along those lines. Prometheus, I gotta go and see Prometheus. I know it's horrible and it's a horror film, and I'm not really interested in seeing horror films, but I think I still want to see Ridley Scott's Prometheus. Gladiator, again, a remarkable film. It was not about the action, it was about the story, it was about the birthing of a nation, it was about liberty, it's about the freedoms, protecting democracy, etc., 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 deeper issues, okay? And so, when you look at these movies, this is what these movies are about. Again, Gladiator is not a superhero movie, but the point is, superhero movies like the DCU have pulled from these kinds of films. Now, Patty Jenkins was a great fan of what's his name? Richard Donner's Superman 1978. Good for her. But her movie actually has more substance than Superman 1978. Because her film deals with a lot more than just Wonder Woman. In fact, it doesn't even focus so much on Wonder Woman. Whereas in Superman 1978, Superman's name is called Superman, and they call him Superman throughout the movie. In Wonder Woman, she's not named Wonder Woman once. But you see the wonder in people's face as in that time and period, she does things that women don't usually do. And so my point being that when you think of, and you reflect on these movies, there's something there. Whereas when you go trying to do that with the MCU, you probably get brain freeze because you realize there's just nothing there for you to reflect on. The rewatchability, and I always talk about rewatchability in movies, not in terms of falling in love with the characters or falling in love with how the movie has done things. I don't give a damn about that. Rewatchability for me has to do with seeing something new every single time you watch this film. And it's interesting that you really didn't have the film's number the first time you saw it. That's what made me watch Man of Steel 6 times. Because I was still picking up things, trying to understand the movie more and more. BVS I watched 10 times. Justice League I watched 10 times. It wasn't because I fell in love with Justice League or I wanted to go to the theater. No, it's because the damn movie had a lot of stuff in it. A lot of stuff in it. A lot of stuff's going on. I do believe Aquaman is going to be the same. You know, Aquaman is going to be the same. There's going to be a lot of different things going on in that movie. So I look forward to it. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. The realism is different to, they say that Winter Soldier is great realism. And I kind of agree with them to a certain degree until they got into the sky with those big hovering plane things. That didn't feel real at all. But the point is that, yes, there was a certain degree of grounding and realism to Winter Soldier. I will not even try to disagree with you that. But the themes and the discussion that Winter Soldier had, it touched on those themes in a superficial way. And it didn't truly reflect the organizations, because some of the organizations were fictitious to start with, and the way how the individuals around the other organizations interfaced with other people of the world. It was somewhat sci-fi futuristic, but it was also Hollywood, and it was very fictitious because officials don't really interact with each other like that. You know, and it's interesting how these same people who praise Winter Soldier come around to Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice. Senator Barris is striking a deal with Lex Luthor, and they're saying, oh, Senator Barris, he didn't have the power to do that and stuff. Senator Barris is a corrupt official. He's going to find ways and means to manipulate things to get Lex Luthor the access. He's a senator, for crying out loud. Don't you know the power of senators in the U.S.? He's not trying to do things by the book. And it's so amazing that people critique these. They really try to nitpick and critique Batman v Superman, but they wouldn't do that with Winter Soldier. And I'm saying to you again, the bias, the lies, the stupidity of people. And I'll say Winter Soldier had a little something in it, but I didn't particularly find it great. You know, Captain America: The First Avenger, fantastic movie, character development, character arc, the villains, you know, period film, of course. So the villains, even Red Skull, the fact that Red Skull didn't just want to go with the Nazi authority. He wanted to veer away from that and do his own thing with Hydra. I thought that was brilliant as well. You know, and people underappreciate Captain America: The First Avenger because it wasn't Disney that did it. It was Paramount at the time. And it's just amazing that Iron Man was done, the very first Iron Man film was done under Paramount, not Disney. People forget these things. Okay. And Captain America: The First Avenger came after that. So, and I think Captain America: The First Avenger is a much better movie than Iron Man. I really do. If you've ever seen the something of Simon Button, just hold on, I'll try and find it, where this guy who was born old, and then he starts to grow younger and younger as he gets older. Benjamin Button, the something story of Benjamin Button. Captain America: The First Avenger, for some reason, reminds me of that. I don't know if it's because of the special effects that they did on the actor to get him shorter and smaller, but just his evolution throughout the whole story reminds me of something of Benjamin Button. I don't know why it does, but I really love it. And my point behind that is that I feel like Black Panther gave us back something like that. It wasn't as good in terms of CG, in my opinion, as Captain America: The First Avenger. But I have to say, story-wise and content-wise, it's amazing. Black Panther. Right? I'm not saying that because I'm black, because I think Black Panther has themes that go beyond color. Just gotta keep on saying that over and over again. Let's see here. All right, so that's it. You guys have finished talking with me. It's 1:58. It's almost 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm so sorry that I went so long, but I just wanted to make these points out there because I feel that There are a lot of people out here that keep on saying inaccurate stuff, and we have to constantly correct them. And usually they don't think that much. You can tell these people don't think things through. And so I wanted to share that with you guys with visual images. And believe you me, there's a lot more military stuff. There's a lot more media stuff. Look at all this media I have here. There's a lot more media stuff here I could have shown you guys. A lot more military stuff. We're talking about media. There's media in Suicide Squad. There was media in, um, and then we haven't even talked about the newspaper articles and stuff, the fictitious media of the fictitious world. And we haven't even talked about that. So we just scratching the surface of this thing. How integrated it is in telling a full picture of the world we live in. I just find that, I mean, it's just incredible, man. So I love to see Snyder's cut of Justice League. Some people are rumoring that it would come out in Comic-Con. I don't think it will, but I'm looking forward to, anyway, seeing that cut of the movie come out. All right. On that note, guys, I hope you guys have a great night. It's kind of late, so let me go in my bed and take a rest. You guys have a good one. Oh, I just scratched my nose. Sorry about that.